Everyone, it's Caroline here, and welcome to the video about how to answer questions on the historic environment. So this only appears on AQA exam paper, so if you're Edexcel or OCR, you don't have to do this. If you are doing AQA, this might well be a question that's caused you a bit of stress. It is a big question, it carries a lot of marks. However, it is also really formulaic. There's a really set way to answer it. And there's only so many questions the exam board can actually ask you about your particular historic environment. So don't panic. I'm going to take you through it step by step, exactly what you have to do. So these are the sites if you're doing the exam in 2025. So every year the exam board will release new sites. So for 2025, if you're doing the Normanisation topic, so the Anglo-Saxons, the Normans, you're going to be doing Durham Cathedral. If you're doing medieval England, Edward I, you're going to do Stokesay Castle. If you're doing Elizabethan, you've got Hardwick Hall. And if you're the restoration period, you've got the Royal Observatory. So if you're a year 10, you're going to have different sites. Still watch the video though, because how you answer the question is going to be the same. I just don't want anyone to go away and learn the wrong topic. So step by step, how we're going to tackle this. The first thing you're going to do is learn everything there is to know about your historic environment. So every year the exam board gives a different one. It might be a building. So 2025, they're all buildings. It could be a site as well. So maybe it could be a battlefield, somewhere like that. So what you need to know about your site, first thing is location. So where is it in England, but also why is it there? Of all the places it could have been, why was the building built there? Why was the battle chosen on that battle site? Function, which is just the fancy term for what does it do? What's the building for? So is it a stately home that's designed for people to live in? Is it a cathedral that's designed for Christians to pray? The structure itself, and the exam board wants you to know this in quite a lot of detail. So this time round, Durham Cathedral, Greenwich Observatory, they'll want you to know different parts of the building. What were they designed for? Similarly, if you've got Hardwick Hall or Stokesay House, what they will want to know is that different rooms, different parts of it, what was the point of them? The designer and or the originator and or the owner. Now, some sites won't have all three. So they might have a designer, but say Durham Cathedral, well, it was owned by the Catholic Church. Whereas something like Hardwick Hall, we know was owned, that had an owner, Bess of Hardwick. So don't panic if you can't find someone who did one of those things. They might not exist. They might not be there to find. So a big question, how does that building or site reflect the culture, the values of the society at the time, or maybe even the fashion of what was at the time? How were people building? What was kind of the fashion? So again, for this one, there are some that don't necessarily apply. So it might be you look at your site and you go, well, I get how it reflects the culture and the fashion, but it doesn't really reflect the values. Don't panic. It might just be that that particular site doesn't do that. And very similarly with the final bullet point, how does it reflect an event or development? There may be an event that's really important for your building or site. There might not be. So for 2025, Durham Cathedral, really important event, Battle of Hastings, 1066. So Durham Cathedral's a Norman cathedral. It's built because of the Battle of Hastings and what happens after it. On the same way, Hardwick Hall, there isn't one particular event that causes it. It's a whole series of things throughout the life of the owner. So the main headline for this bit is don't panic. If you can't find one of these, it might be that it's not there to find. but really get to grips with your site. There's no requirement that you visited it. So there are lots of videos on the internet. In particular, I've seen some on YouTube for Durham Cathedral and for Hardwick Hall that are designed for GCSE AQA students, and it will give you a tour of the building and pointing out the things you will need for this question. If you've got the other two, it's not on YouTube. They're not designed for AQA, but they are a walkthrough of those buildings, and you'll still get loads of information. So you've got all your information. You go into the exam knowing your site backwards and forwards. There's only so many things they can ask. So what they're going to do, they're going to give you a statement about the overall time period. So Norman England was like this. It was like this in Elizabethan society. And then the question is, how much do you agree based on your site? So how far does your study of Hardwick Hall, Durham Cathedral, the Royal Observatory support this? So they make a statement about the whole time period. Based on what you know about that one particular example you've looked at, does it back it up? So obviously there are lots of cathedrals that are out there. There's lots of Elizabethan stately homes. So this particular example that you've looked at, does it back up the statement? So they will either give you statements about change. So does your site reflect a change in the time period? So is there a big change in that time period that we can see in the building? Or sometimes it's continuity, so lack of change. Is it actually that things in this time period are staying very stable and that's reflected in the building? They might ask you about the causes. Why was your building made? What was the owner or the designer, what were they trying to get out of it? What was the point of it? And then kind of the other end of that, once it was built, what happened as a consequence? So what was happening as a consequence of that building being there? That is it. That's what they can ask you. So as you go through your site and you learn all about it, just be thinking to yourself, does this represent change? Does this represent lack of change or continuity? Why were they making this building? What happened for the owner or the designer as a consequence of it? So you're in the exam, you've got your question. First step you're going to do, you're going to write a plan. So you need to find 3 points, one of which will be given in the question. So that's going to be a great sort of nudge to you. You get one given in the question, you need to think of 2 more. So I've got some examples for you of what this might look like. I've used Hardwick Hall and I've used Durham Cathedral. If you're doing the other 2 sites or you're in year 10, don't panic, you use the same steps. It's just an example. So the main change Elizabethan manor houses demonstrates was the greater wealth of their owners. So the reason we start to get these incredible stately homes in the Elizabethan times is there were more people with money kicking around at the time to build them. How far does your study of Hardwick Hall support this? So they've already given me point number 1. They've said it supports the change is there because greater wealth. So more people with more money. I need to come up with 2 of my own. So I'm going to add in fashion. Fashion changed at this time. We've got the Renaissance going on. There's new styles, a way of showing that you are right at the cutting edge of style is to have a house in this new way. Also, position in society. There are people who really want to demonstrate their position in society. And in this time period, building a manor house is seen as like an accepted way of doing this. In this case, Bess of Hardwick, the person who owns Hardwick Hall, is showing off her close links with royalty. So Same again, different question. The main impact of Norman Cathedral church building was their increased power. So the reason the Normans are going around building these new cathedrals is to increase their power. How far does your study of Durham Cathedral support this? So they've already given us one reason. So the Normans are building them to increase their power. I need to come up with two more. So I'm going to put in money. So you get pilgrims, people traveling to big churches, big cathedrals. And also to show their piety, to show how religious they are, how strong their faith is, how strong their love of God is. Okay, so they give you one, you come up with two more that it could be. There's no right or wrong answer for this. So when it says how far does your study support this, it doesn't matter if you say, yes, that is the main impact, or if you say, actually, I don't think it is. I think it's another point that I've made up. Can't get it wrong. So finally, your structure. How are you going to go about writing this? 3 paragraphs plus a conclusion. And your paragraphs are going to be very similar to other straightforward essay questions. So you're going to make your point. So one of the 3 that you've written, remember they give you one. Then you're going to include lots of evidence, lots of detail, and you're going to explain how that evidence proves your point. So explain why that evidence is necessary. And then the final thing you're going to do, and this is where you get loads of marks, you're going to link to the question, how important is the point you're making? If you weigh it up against the other 2 points, is it the most important? So one trick to do this, if you're not sure, is think to yourself, was this point there before the building? So what I mean by that, if you're saying Durham Cathedral is built because it gets money for the church, was the church making money from the site of Durham before that building? And you could say, well, yeah, actually, there's a Saxon church on that site beforehand that would have brought in money. However, a much bigger cathedral would have brought in a lot more money. Hence, it's an important reason. So if you're talking about Hardwick Hall and you're saying, oh, it was built to show the power and the wealth of the person who lived there. Did people use buildings to show power and wealth before? Well, yes, they do, but nowhere near to this extent. The houses before that much, much smaller. Therefore, that is a really strong point. So just something to have in the back of your head. And then you finish off with the conclusion. So in conclusion, I agree or disagree with the statement. Doesn't matter which one you put. You are going to talk about the other 2 points. So although there are other points, such as whichever 2 you thought were least important. And then your final sentence, it is clear that your chosen point is the most important because one sentence just to sum it up. So there you go. Actually, when we go into the details, it's quite straightforward. 3 simple paragraphs plus a conclusion. There's only so much they can ask you. So just make sure you know your site really well.